You guys ready to dive in? All right, we're going to start in Psalm 139. Psalm 139. Psalm that we started out with, we're going to keep returning to several times as we go further up, further into our series, Imago Dei, Image of God, as we are seeking to really discover and unpack our identity in our Creator, who He made us to be. So 139, the psalmist writes these words: "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. For my frame was not hidden from you, and when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. And all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. And when I awake, I am still with you." The psalmist here is painting a picture. He's in a dream. He's in a dream because this reality that he's experiencing is really too overwhelming, too awe-inspiring to be true, it seems. And so as he's considering what God has done in creating him and giving him his life and his being, this is so overwhelming to the writer of this psalm, the psalmist. Anyone have a guess who might have been the one who penned this psalm, who wrote this song? David. So David's writing these songs, and he's talking about the intimate intricacy with which God infinitely knows him, and the ever-presence, the inescapable ever-presence that surrounds him. He begins the psalm by saying, before a thought is formed, before a word is formed on my tongue, you know it in advance. Where can I go to run, to escape, to hide from your presence? Nowhere. This is how well you know me. And yet you love me. Fully known, David says. I am fully known. And yet you love me. How precious to me. Now, I remember a couple of weeks ago when we first started unpacking this, and we got into that verse 17 a little bit, how precious to me are your thoughts. And I told you that just doesn't work for me anymore. I've looked at all the English translations of the Bible. They all say it that way. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. And if I were to count the sum of them, there'd be more than would outnumber the sands on the seashore. But it just didn't really seem to fit, especially as I looked in the language of the Old Testament and saw the preposition that was used there and recognized that preposition, when he says, how precious are your thoughts to me, O God. How precious to me are your thoughts. That preposition for to is also used for to be translated to say toward, or for, or concerning. And when I look at the context of this passage, he's not saying, your thoughts are precious to me, oh God. What he's really saying, it seems to me from the context and from the clues from the language, even though I've not seen any commentators or any English Bible translations say this, it's really saying, how precious are your thoughts concerning me, oh God. How precious, how amazing your thoughts are about me. And I've not seen really anyone say that. And then, how many of you are holding in your hands today an NIV, a New International Version of the Bible? I didn't notice this until last night. Do you see the footnote there? Do you see the footnote in your NIV? What does the NIV say? How amazing are your thoughts concerning me. The translation committee of the NIV got it right. I'm happy to report. What he's saying here is that the idea that I am on your mind, your thoughts day and night, infinitely, unendingly, you are thinking about me. You are caring for me. I am fearfully, wonderfully made. And from really before I was formed in my parents' womb, before I was drawing my first breath, you knew me. You loved me. You chose me before there was ever a me. And when I was being made and imaged and shaped and woven together, even in my mother's womb, it was with such intricate masterpiece, such care, such skill, such love that you made me. I want you to hear that intimacy with which David is talking about how much God, this is not just some generic love, some generic omniscient knowledge of God. This is extremely personal. And it's because it is so personal as David is recognizing his identity as an image bearer and a recipient of the grace and the love of the creator of the cosmos. He is overwhelmed. He is awestruck. He is absolutely flabbergasted, and he says, it's like a dream. This is too good. This is too amazing. This is too breathtaking to be real. And so I wake up thinking it's been a dream, and there you are. And it's been real all along. You're constantly, without end, thinking and caring and loving me. Isn't that, think about that. Trying to help us understand who we are. Now, it's important that we set that stage because today I want you to read another picture that the same psalmist writes about his condition before God, all the way back from the time in his mother's womb. And this is going to build on where we left off last week as we talked about how God created us, humanity, in his image and gave us identity as image bearers of God, spiritual beings, unique and separate and different than every other living creature, everything else in the world. How that us being mankind, and male and female, uniquely and distinctly images the way that God has created. So where we left off last week, we were talking about how beautiful it is that of maleness, that masculinity is a wonderful gift from God when it's not distorted and destroyed by sin and marred by sin, when it hasn't become something really passive or something very abusive. That masculinity is something that should be embraced because men, that is who we are. We are men. And there's a lot of men that don't really know what it means to be a man. And so part of this journey is to help us as men understand manness in imaging God. And the same is true about women, that women equally, from the beginning, reflecting the glory and majesty and beauty of the image of God in their feminine soul, in their femininity. I'm not trying to say feminism. I'm trying to avoid that because that's not what I'm meaning. But you know what I'm saying. In their feminine soul, the fact that they are woman, just like man, they are imaging the glory and image of God in their womanness. And so, ladies, being a woman is something glorious. It is the way God made. So at your core identity, and man, my heart breaks for how our world in its brokenness is so misunderstanding this today more than ever, that manhood and womanhood and maleness and femaleness is at the core of who God made us. Now, when we met the snake in the garden, what did we see he going after? His mission is to attack the image of God in the object of God's ultimate love, the creative apex of his masterpiece in humanity. So does it not make sense that what the enemy is after here is in trying to destroy the image of God and attacking the identity of human beings as image bearers of God first, and secondly, as male and female. And our culture right now, our world has lost its ever-loving, and I'm saying this with compassion. I'm saying this with brokenness. Don't ever talk about this if you can't talk about it out of just a sense of hurt and brokenness for the world that has fallen under the destructive image, destroying lies of an enemy. It should cause us to weep when we see people not be able to understand who God made them be. So this idea of maleness and femaleness is something that's beautiful, reflecting the image of God. But yes, we saw last week the plunge into darkness, the plunge into rebellion and sin, and how that brought with it so much destruction, so much pain, suffering, sin. And the image of God is defaced, not erased, but defaced by the fall. So with that in mind, and as we're thinking about how the psalmist is talking about how he's wonderfully, fearfully made by God, wonderfully woven together with such care and intricate love, listen to that same psalmist write these words, Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Do you think the psalmist had an awareness of his condition, his brokenness, his sinfulness, how the image of God has been marred in him by sin? You think he's got an awareness of that? Yeah. Verse 3, he says, I know my transgressions. My sin is ever before me. Against you and you only have I sinned, and I've done what is evil in your sight. You are so right in your verdict and justified when you judge. Now listen to this, verse 5. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb. You taught me wisdom in that secret place. What secret place? In the womb. From the time he was in his mother's womb. So he goes on to say, cleanse me and I will be clean. Wash me, I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all of my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit in me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Interesting how the same psalmist wrote the song, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And in another song, he's recognizing the wretchedness of his condition and how the image of God in him has been marred and how it's manifested. You know what the occasion for him writing this particular psalm was? This was after David, who is the only one that's called in all of the Bible a man after God's own heart. The whole purpose, the whole life lesson of David is not be like David. That's not the lesson of any of these giants in the Bible. We're never supposed to look at these stories and say, hey, be like Samson. Hey, be like Gideon. That's not the purpose. The purpose of looking at David is to see that we needed a true and better David, a faithful and righteous king who, when faced with temptation, would stand and be righteous for us. That's the whole purpose. But David was the best. There's not a person in this room. There's not a person in this room who loved or worshiped or lived a life of awe in front of God more than David. And so the moral of the story of David is that all of us are capable of anything. This man who wrote all of these worship psalms, who stood at the throne of God, danced naked, unashamed, uninhibited before God in praise and worship. This man became guilty of rape and murder. And yes, it was rape. There was a power differential there as an indicator that Bathsheba was not a willing participant, and what David did was rape, and it was murder. And that was the occasion. Why? Because God has shown us that even the best among us is capable of this, guilty of this kind of stuff. And that's why we need a true and better David that can give us a new identity. And a new, that can deal with that original condition that which we were born, as he describes it in verse 5. Surely I was sinful at birth. And sin, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Some of the older English translations are unfortunately translated in a way that says, in sin my mother conceived me. That's probably how you learned this if you've been reading the Bible for many years, and that just doesn't translate well, because there have been some who've taken that to say, well, David's mother, and not Bathsheba, but David's mother and father conceived David. It was a sinful act. And so there are even some pretty big religious systems now that say that the act of physical intimacy is still in itself something that is inherently sinful and shameful, which is hogwash. Sex is a beautiful, glorious gift intended for our pleasure and our joy, and to evoke in us a worship response in God. Sex is something that was intended to give us just a tiny sliver of a glimpse of the ecstasies that await for us in the glorified new heavens and new earth. Sex is a beautiful, wonderful, glorious thing. And boy, I pray that that's the framework that you are teaching your children and grandchildren. I pray that you're not avoiding, I pray that you're not dreading having the talk. Oh my goodness, this isn't the talk. This is a wonderful celebration and explanation and exploration with your children from the time they're very young, yes, appropriately so, but that you talk and teach them about the glory. The glory of physical intimacy that God has created for us. And again, if God gives us such a wonderful, beautiful gift, what does the enemy want to do to that? Exactly what he has done to it. Taken it and made it something distorted and disgusting at times and shameful. It's never meant to be that way. So when he says, in sin my mother conceived me, he is not saying the act of intimacy of conception was sinful. There are whole big systems who teach that. There are systems today that teach that physical intimacy outside of the purpose of procreation is sinful. Baloney! It's sacred. It is sacred, and it is wonderful, and it is to be embraced and nurtured, and it is for your flourishing. What he's saying is that when he was conceived with the genetic material of Adam and Eve, and that original condition of the fall that you and I are conceived in. In other words, born beautifully broken and in need of rescue from before the moment of our first breath. That's the point that he's making here. But how can this guy say in one psalm, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and in the other psalm say, I am a wretch and broken and marred and capable and guilty of terrible things? Which one is true? Which is true? Am I fearfully and wonderfully made to image the glory of my God? Is he constantly thinking about me with fondness and with pleasure? Is he constantly loving and for my good? Am I always on his heart and mind? Is that true? Or am I, from the time I was born or before I was born in my mother's womb, guilty and capable of rotten, dark, terrible things? Which one of these things is true? They're both simultaneously true. And so before we go further up and further in, and before we start kind of helping you unwire and unpack how you are created and helping you discover the image of God uniquely in you, we have to have this foundational truth. All of us are wonderfully made wretches before God. All of us are guilty and broken in need of redemption. And listen, this is so critically important because you will never discover your true identity until you discover your new identity in the new covenant that God has given us through the clothing of our nakedness with the righteousness of his Son. You will never know who you were meant to be. You will never discover what you were made to be. You will never find yourself outside of finding yourself in the glory of the gospel of the new creation that Christ brings. So, Here's the problem. Our counseling offices are filled with people whose core problem is an identity crisis. They are struggling and trying to find who they are because someone has marred them, someone has wounded them, someone has done despicable or distorted things, someone has lied to them, or they've become arrogant, self-righteous, prideful, self-lovers. The enemy doesn't care which ditch you fall into. You can either be a self-loathing person who has no idea who you are, or you can be a self-worshiper. He doesn't care. Whatever pill works for you, that he can keep you disconnected, whichever works for you. And so, as we're kind of trying to understand this beautiful thing, we need to understand how Satan attacks the image of God and his image bearers and keeps people in strongholds and in lies and in distortion. And he'll do that through self-righteousness. He'll do that through self-help. He'll do that through self-condemnation and shame. He'll do that in a thing that I call therapeutic humanism. See, this brokenness, this marred image manifests itself in each of us in different ways. But the disease is the same for all of us. But for some of us, it might express itself in sexual brokenness. Or some, it might express itself in dependency or addiction to chemicals or things. For some of us, it might express itself in self-righteous religion. But the disease is the same. The condition of the broken and marred image that was part of us from the time that we were in the womb and born into, that condition is all the same. And the world only offers you a couple of options, and it never gets to the solution. And so you can go and sit before a counselor and spend years and years and thousands of dollars. And if that counselor isn't leading you to a place where you deny yourself in order to find yourself in your Creator, that counselor is practicing malpractice, whether they call themselves a Christian counselor or not. When someone tells you to look to yourself, believe in yourself, when someone tries to lead you to a place of independence instead of interdependence, or self-righteousness and self-reliance instead of community and vulnerability, Satan doesn't care what lie works for you. He just cares using the one that works. And he's got a lot of tools in his tool bag, but he's not original. I have found this. So let's talk about that just for a second. Let's talk about, for a moment, about how this works out. How the enemy mars the image of God and creates this identity crisis, or for some of you, identity amnesia, that opens the door for us to experience very powerful strongholds that result in all kinds of emotional and relational and psychological brokenness. Let's just talk about that for a moment. Because a lot of times what we're looking at through the lenses of the world trying to fix with different techniques is at its core a spiritual problem. And if at its core it's a spiritual problem, follow my logic here, if at the core humanity's main issue that expresses itself in all kinds of brokenness and wretchedness, if at the core is a spiritual problem, then would it not follow also that at its cure is a spiritual solution? That what people really need, you and I really need, is a new creation, a new identity, other than the one that has been marred by the enemy and the lies that he has constructed. So there are people living in what I call a palace of lies. And it doesn't matter how these lies manifest themselves. He just wants to know what works for you. And by the way, not for nothing, this is why you living your life in community with other believers, and I'm talking about up close and personal, is so critical, because you can't see those. You need help out of this palace. And so that's why you need to surround yourself with people like I have surrounded myself with, people who look into my life and love me enough and to see the shadows, see the places that are broken, to call me out, to not just hold me accountable, but I mean walk beside me and pick up the load and shoulder it for me and with me. You were not made to do this alone. That's one of the big lies in this palace, that the enemy is that you can somehow do that. You need to stay in the shadows. Cover with the fig leaves, all right? People can't handle this. You can't be vulnerable. You can't be real. Don't do this. Let's just shh. So people are white-knuckling their lives away. So how does it happen? How does it work? Let's go back to where we left off last week in Genesis chapter 3. All right, we won't read it all, but just remember what happened as he comes to Adam and Eve, comes to Eve, starts dialoguing with Eve. She's in a conversation that she shouldn't even be in. We saw last week that her husband, who was with her the whole time. So what was the sin of Adam initially? It was his silence. It was his passivity. It was his passivity. As he watched Eve commit suicide right before his hand, and then he decides that he will plunge in with her. And so there are consequences that happen. Now, God had already told them in the day that they rebelled, in the day that they did that they would surely die. They would surely die. And so when they do this, do they die? Does she take a bite of the fruit and then, myocardial infarction, boom, and she's flat on the garden floor? No, that's not how that happens. But did she die? Did he die? Yes, they immediately were cut off from their Creator, and the image in them was marred. And so the consequences that God, you guys have been parents, you know this. When we unless we're just really sick parents, which I think most of us have been at some point or the other, but when we put boundaries, when we're fairly healthy parents, we put boundaries in the lives of our children. Why? Because we want to be control freaks, because we don't want them to have any fun. It breaks our hearts to see joy in the lives of our children. Is that why we put boundaries there? No. We put boundaries in the lives of our children because we love them. Because we know if we can put healthy boundaries in their lives, then they can actually enjoy what? Freedom within those boundaries. But they crossed that boundary. They broke that law. They committed treason. And as a result of that, the brokenness enters not just the human heart, but all of creation. God will say to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Thorns and thistles will now be." So all of creation, this moment, all of creation right now is groaning because of the curse and anticipating and waiting that the redemption that was purchased by Christ on the cross, as he wore that thorn of crowns and paid the price not only for the sins of humanity, but for the redemption and restoration of all of creation. Creation now is yearning and anguishing and angst, waiting for that day to find its completion and fulfillment. And when that day will bring forth the new creation. So with Adam, the whole human race, the ground, the plants, even work was cursed. But this is what I want you to see here, something. So I want to talk about man and woman for just a minute today. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but to me this is just too important for us to not address during this series. So we're gonna tackle it today and then move on. But I want you to see specifically how the enemy, in attacking the image of God, goes after the union that God created for male and female to become one flesh. Right? So track with me here. Verse 3, or chapter 3, verse 16. after they had admitted, after we saw last week where God appears in the garden crying out, "Where are you? Where are you?" That invitation. Remember, we said last week, God never asks a question that he doesn't know the answer. It's not that he didn't know where Adam and Eve were. He wasn't aware that they were hiding in the shadows, trying to cover their shame with fig leaves, right? Created to live naked and unashamed, but now they are trying to futilely cover themselves in shame, in guilt, in fear. So he knows where they are, but he calls out to them, "Where are you?" And that question was an invitation. Come out of the shadows. Let's talk. Come, let's reason together about this kind of stuff. So let's talk about that just a little bit. What did he say? Well, we know what he said to the snake. We won't dive into it, but to the enemy, to the snake, he said, now there's going to be war. There's going to be war, and this is what's going to happen. The seed of the woman is going to come and crush your head, saying that he's going to send a dragon slayer, a serpent slayer, so a deliverer, a redeemer, one who will bring the new creation, the new identity, the one who will come and put right what just went wrong, the one who will pay the price and will save his creation, and he's going to be born of a woman, meaning that he will, through the womb of a woman, enter the world and live a life as a man. Because now that man no longer looks like God, God will look like man, and he will come and he will live the perfect life that will make him qualified to do the rescuing thing. So in the gospel, he announces to Satan, you will wound him, he will crush you. So it begins. And then he talks to the woman, and here's what he says to the woman. He says, verse 16 of Genesis 3, he says, to the woman, he says, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. Have any of you ever watched other animals give birth? Anybody raise animals? I grew up raising all kinds of animals, seeing animals. Have you ever noticed just the massive contrast between human childbirth and animal birth? The scriptures are showing us this is part of this travail, this fall, part of the curse that was brought into the world. And so something that was not originally intended to be so agonizing and so terribly painful originally, but because of sin, because of the fall, he says, I'll make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to your children. And listen to this. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So can we just take a few moments and just talk about how Satan is after the distortion and destruction of your marriage or your future marriage? Can we just talk real about that for a moment? When he says to Eve here, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Are we talking about pre-fall here, or are we talking about post-fall? See, this obviously, if this is a consequence, if this is part of the pains that are going to be brought in by the destruction that they have invited into creation, if the earth is cursed, if humanity and their offspring, if the whole cosmos is now cursed by sin and needs remedy, then what we're talking about here is part of the result of that curse, which tells me that this is not how it was originally designed to be. Now, let me clarify something real clearly. Headship was clearly taught as a beautiful gift from the beginning. We're not saying headship was something that was part of the curse. That was part of the original design. We see that in the Trinity. Remember, as we were talking about how God exists 3 in 1 in this beautiful community and this structure, and there is headship in the Trinity. Christ is equal to the Father. He is totally God. The Spirit is equal to Christ and the Father. He is totally God. Yet there is headship in the Trinity. And God created us, humanity, to image Him. And so there is headship in the church. There is headship in the family. But let me tell you, because I can't assume anything anymore when I say that, because people are coming from all kinds of backgrounds. Let me tell you, headship is a beautiful thing, because Adam's job as the head of his family was not to rule or to dominate with an overbearing. It was to protect and provide and to flourish. His job was to serve his equal partner in a way that caused her to flourish. Headship is made for your flourishing. Listen, you'll get this, right? How many of you think your kids should be calling the shots in your family? Well, I don't assume anything anymore from what I see in our culture, right? Again, how does the enemy want to destroy? You want to destroy somebody's life early? You give them parents who are passive, and you let the children be the head of the family. Listen, those of you, when you get married, do not let your child become the center of your marriage. No, that child is a welcome part of your marriage. But if you want to destroy them, make them the center of your family. You will create in them and cultivate in them a narcissism and an inability to be able to live life and to function in the real world and to relate to other people. And if you want to know why some people can't live their lives without giving terrible, mean tweets that destroy themselves and other people, it's because they are little bitty, selfish gods unto themselves that were nurtured that way by their parents. So I think all of us would say, for the flourishing of the children, they need parents who lovingly set boundaries and make provisions and help them, train them for their flourishing. We would all say that, right? In the church, God has given us a very simple structure. It is not a flat democracy. That is insanity. The system that I come from, Baptist polity, a lot of Baptists believe that the church is a democracy. The church is not a democracy. The church is a kingdom with a king. There is one senior pastor in the church, and it's not me. It is Jesus Christ. He is our pastor. And so he's given a structure that he is the head of his church. And we're not going to discern his will by everybody at different spiritual levels. Some people are not spiritual at all, having the same weight and voice and vote. No, isn't that crazy? That's insane. So God has said, in your body, you look around, you see people who are spiritually mature and gifted and who I have placed a call on. And as a church, you recognize that and they surrender their lives to this place of servant leadership. And the church recognizes that and they lead and shepherd the church. That's headship. So that's why we don't have the kids in children's ministry today, or somebody coming off the street that we don't know, or people who are very unhealthy, having the same voice and vote as everybody else. God has made headship in the church, and he's done it in the family. Do you see this? It's in the Trinity. It's in the family. It's in the church. It's in the marriage. And so this headship thing was never about who's ruling over who. It was about these equal parties imaging God for the flourishing of one another. And so as the head, Adam's responsibility was for the flourishing, to serve Eve. And she was created to come beside him and to enjoy and to flourish in her gifts and the way God designed her. And there was this beautiful harmony and this wonderful unity and this, what the Bible uses a word, this shalom. And so there was no bickering. There was no there was no conflict. There was no abuse of power. There was no rebellion. There was no usurping. There was none of that. It was wonderful. How many of you would say, I'd like some of that? That's what I want. That's the way it was. And then sin enters the picture. And he says, as a result of that, this is what's going to happen. Your desire is going to be to your husband, and he's going to rule over you. Now, this was not prescription. This was a description of the distortion that would happen at the fall. Two things are going to happen. Your desire is going to be to your husband. There's going to be a natural, ladies, I love you, but I need you to hear this. There's going to be a natural daughter of Eve genetic imprint that's going to want to usurp and rebel and resist against spiritual leadership. Spiritual male leadership. And he will rule over you. Man, I need you to hear this. There's going to be a natural, genetic, sinful proclivity in the hearts of men now to be passive or to be abusive, to be overbearing, insensitive, uncaring, not understanding, not seeking the flourishing and the good of your partner, but to be selfish, bullheaded, out to lunch, phoning it in. That's a result of the fall. That this beautiful harmony and the shalom that was there in the beginning now is going to be busted. And so in the palace of lies that the enemy is going to construct, what was unity and harmony is now going to be conflict and friction. How many of you in here, just show me, how many of you married, been married, are married, all right? How many of you experienced any bit of what I'm kind of alluding to here today? Yeah, right. Oh, the ways that I have failed my wife in over 25 years of marriage. Ways that I sometimes I just can't even, was that me? The insensitive, the selfish, the at times controlling, the overbearing, at times the passive, weak, cowardly. All the way this has manifested itself in my failures and in yours. Let's just talk about it for a little bit. I'll give you a couple of examples, which kind of help you. Just a little help, and we'll do it quick and move on. But in your conflict with your wife or your husband, are you aware? Are you ever aware that so much of that is not really even you? Are you picking out the source of this angst, or this bitterness, this fear, this defensiveness? Are you picking out the frameworks, the lies, the things that how many of you are operating in the dark, forgetting that what's going on in your marriage is not just two sinners struggling, but there is actually a spiritual war that has happened? I know we say that, but do we really believe that? Do we really understand that if the enemy wants to destroy my children, the most effective way he can do that is to destroy my marriage? That the greatest thing I can provide for my kids is a marriage with all of its brokenness, all of its warts, all of its problems, but images the grace of God and provide for them the stability. I mean, am I really, really living in the fact that God has chosen really one thing on this planet to image the gospel? And that is the marriage relationship. And so if Satan hates God's image bearers, and he wants to distort and destroy, and he wants to completely wreck their identity and therefore their purpose on this planet, if he wants to do that, if he wants to cause, and all of this, you got to understand, we are just pawns in this. He's really going after God. This is really, when he's after you, it's because he hates you, because God loves you. So this is an attack on God. So if Satan wants to delegitimize or make a mockery of the gospel of Jesus Christ in our world, what is the most effective thing he can get 2 for 3 for, he can kill a bunch of birds with one stone. He can break children's hearts. He can cause financial ruin. He can completely mar the gospel message. He can wreck people's lives. He can do a lot of things at once by just doing what? Going after that one flesh union that God created in the beginning that's part of our identity. We were made to be images of God. And one of the most powerful ways he created for us to do that, not just in our humanity, not just in our sexuality, but also in the community. Most specifically in the union of two people becoming one flesh that images the glory of God and the relationship between God the Father and God the Son and Christ and his church. So you got to understand this relationship that you're in. It's not just it's not just pink lenses and blue lenses. That frustrates me. It's not just that he's from Mars and she's from Venus. That's crayon talk, okay? It's that you are neck deep in sulfuric war around you with an enemy who wants to destroy you, who wants to mock you, who wants to destroy your kids, who wants to destroy the gospel influence. He wants to rip you to shreds. And so he is not playing with your marriage. He is at war to kill it. By the way, you're going to do a lot of things through the years that could absolutely destroy it. This is why grace is so critically important. So, in the friction, in the conflict, that is part of what he's talking about here. Your desire will be to your husband. He will rule over you. That shalom is going to be broken, and now there's going to be conflict, and the enemy is going to be here doing this. How do you engage this? And I'm specifically asking, how do you engage it wrongly? What I'd like to do for you today is I'd like for you to diagnose yourself a little bit in this so that you can start reclaiming the image of God in your family and in your marriage. So how do you do this? Wrongly, badly. Are you the archaeologist? You dig up bones? You live in the past. And so conflicts that come up now, instead of dealing with what's going on now, you are pulling up conflicts or issues or failures from years or even decades ago. Are you the archaeologist? Archaeologists, they don't even have to go and start digging with the spade, man. They've got display. They got places where they display. And so at an instance moment, when you're triggered, you can start pulling up stuff that someone has already said, I'm so sorry. There's no excuse. I'm so, please forgive me. But you keep bringing those things back up. You're an archaeologist. Can I, in love and in grace and in humility, tell you that Jesus said, if you do not forgive people their sins against you, neither will your Father forgive you of your sins. Can I just tell you that? See, if you're an archaeologist, your primary problem is not the pains that you've experienced in the past. Your primary problem is unbelief and unforgiveness. And I know this is going to sound heavy, but you are mocking the cross of Jesus Christ, who died that people could be forgiven. And maybe this says, man, I've got some areas in my life that I've just not forgiven. Maybe you don't know how. I'm going to tell you, until this gets addressed, you're living in a palace of lies. You can't believe the truth. You can't see the truth. Your mind is a playground for the enemy. This palace of lies that he has you in is really a dungeon, isn't it? Are you an accountant? I know somebody like this. I won't mention any names, but it sounds a lot like Clint. You got to keep the score. You got to tit for tat. You got to win the point. you got to expose to make yourself feel better. You got to get at the truth at no cost. Is it more important for you to win a fight than it is to win the heart and mind of your one flesh partner? You got to make sure everything balances out and evens out. You got to point out the inequities. Are you the accountant? I'm going to tell you, when you're doing that kind of stuff, you're discounting the person that Christ died for and said, in all of your brokenness and all of your needs and all of your weaknesses and all of your history and all of your failures, I love you and you're enough. See, when you're an accountant, really nothing's ever enough for you until you've reconciled it to the penny and you feel completely justified in everything. Is that you? Are you the architect? You like building walls? Instead of crossing over barriers, challenges, you like to rationalize reasons why you should isolate, shut down, go dark. Are you an architect? You like to build those barriers. Maybe you feel safe in that place. You construct all these walls that Superman couldn't leap. And so you make all of these decisions for your partner before they even have a chance. You decide for them their response before they're even given an opportunity because you have constructed walls. Are you the amnesiac? Have you forgotten the good? Have you forgotten how to be grateful? Have you forgotten the reason that you love this person in the first place? Have you forgotten the qualities about them that you admire? Have you gotten so mired down by hurt or anger or bitterness or whatever that you just forget who they really are and you focus on their problems and their weaknesses and their warts? Guys, I could go on and on and on, couldn't I? The point I'm trying to make is the fall has affected us all. Would you agree? And it affects the way that we relate, especially in this relationship that God has given us. So what do we need in this? What is the solution here? What is the solution? Start looking at life through pink lenses? You know? Go start understanding his needs, her needs. All that's good. All of that. I'm not saying that that's not valid. The core problem here is deeper. The enemy has constructed strongholds in our marriages for one reason. He wants to destroy us, and he wants to destroy our kids, and he wants to make a mockery of the image of God, especially as it was originally intended. And what we need is a radical new creation in our hearts. Well, what the gospel, you hear me say it all the time, what the gospel can do to a marriage in flames or in ashes. Why? Because the gospel tells me I can start, I'm free. I'm free to focus on my failures, and I'm free to give grace. If I am a grace-oriented person, if I'm functioning from a framework of grace, then I can give that grace to my wife. But if I'm not living in awe of the goodness and the grace of the gospel of Jesus Christ every day, if I'm not waking up every day with the realization of my desperation for him and what he's done for me, and how every day his mercies are fresh and new every morning, and how he's still, no, I'm nowhere near what I need to be, but I'm not what I used to be, and how his grace is working and transforming and accepting and loving and drawing me in. If I can live in the grace orientation of who I am in Christ, if I can get my identity based in grace, then I can do that for you. But I cannot give you what I don't have. Are you hearing me? I cannot give you grace if I am not living and functioning and breathing out of grace. So if I am not living in grace, what do I need? I need a new identity. I need to discover who I really am. Not who my therapist says who I am. Not who Oprah tells me who I am. Not who my dad told me who I am. Not who my friends, not who you tell me who I am, but who my Maker tells me who I am. Because when I understand that and I am functioning in the grace in which He pours out on me every day, then I don't really need anybody else. And when I don't need anybody else to make me complete, I can actually give myself away to someone else. And when I am in awe of the forgiveness and the mercy every day that God is a wretch like me, then how could I possibly withhold that from my wife? How could I possibly, as someone who lives in awe of grace, be stingy with that? So I have to get into that new identity. I have to go to Ezekiel 36 where he tells me that in Christ, the new creation does this. When he says, I will give you a new heart, Ezekiel 36:26, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you, and I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. That is a new identity in the new covenant. We don't have time to get to this today, but where we'll pick up next week is Paul. Paul got this. You guys realize that Paul was the Al-Qaeda of his day. And I'm not blowing that up. I'm not using an absurd analogy. He was a terrorist who shed the blood of many, many believers. But have you ever read the things that Paul writes? I think the guy got grace. He says in Galatians, he says, I was advancing in Judaism beyond my years, my own age, among my people, extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. He was talking about how much he had to be proud of in the flesh and in the religion and Judaism and his connections and his power. He said, I had all that going on, but he says, but when God who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by His grace, He was pleased to reveal His Son in me that I might preach Him among the nations. Here's a guy who got his identity. And because he got it, he was able to give it away. So here's where we're going. As we understand how the enemy has constructed palaces of lies that are nothing more than dungeons, so much of what you believe about your partner, about your friends, may be a sophisticated construct of nothing but lies. So much of what you believe about yourself may be nothing but a bunch of effective, imprisoning lies. Paul, he was able to cut through that. So over the next couple of weeks, as we start tearing down these fortresses, these palaces of lies, I want you to start realizing in yourself how that you were wonderfully and fearfully made. How that you were cultivated. How that you were made for a mission. That's meaning. You're looking for meaning in your life? You have a mission for which you were made. Very specific, unique to you. You were shaped for service. There's an impact in this planet that you were put here for that no one else can make but you. You were created to cultivate. You were made to be a cultivator, to be fruitful. Your life is meant to be fruitful. You were wired to worship. And I don't mean just singing songs or attending gatherings. I mean to live a life in awe. That as a result of that, concludes in a constant joy that is bizarre and inexpressible. You were wired for worship. So in the next couple of weeks, I want us to unpack this deeper. I want us to go further up, further in. But today I wanted you to see how the fall has distorted, not just within the family, but in so many ways how he has distorted the relationships. Why? Because you and I were made to be in community. We were. The enemy wants to destroy that. He wants to isolate you. He wants to keep you in a place where you are imprisoned in a fortress of lies. Never knowing who you are. Never being able to say with joy and awe, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Yes, you were sinful from the time of your conception. But you know what went wrong in the garden was solved at the cross. And that's the gospel. And I'm telling you, no matter where you've been, no matter where you are, no matter what you're facing, I am telling you that everything that has marred us, everything that has imprisoned us, everything that has shackled us, everything that has deceived us has been dealt with at the cross of Jesus Christ. And that is good news, because in Him we can find our true selves, who we were meant to be. That is good news. It's the gospel. Thank you, Father, that you have created us with a divine design to be uniquely us, that no one else could be. And that though the world groans in brokenness, you bring back the shalom. Through your sacrifice, you have made it to be that we could be at peace with God. And at peace with God, we could be at peace with ourselves. And at peace with ourselves, we could be known, and we could be loved, and we could know, and we could love in harmony, in unity. That what was distorted in the fall was redeemed at the cross. And now there is neither male nor female, Jew or Greek, slave or free, but you have made us one new humanity. And you have given us a new identity, a new heart, and a new spirit, and a new destiny in Jesus Christ. Help us find ourselves in you, I pray. Amen.
Earth is full of the glory of God. Come make much of the name above all names. Creation cries out, every knee bows. Jesus